In 2022, we celebrate 130 years of HBCU football. On December 27th, 1892, Livingstone and Biddle College, now known as Johnson C. Smith University, played in Salisbury, North Carolina, with Biddle winning 5-0. Over time, HBCU football has evolved. HBCU football's popularity continues to rise. Millions attend games each year and millions more watch on television. The HBCU bands provide some of the top entertainment in the country. Over that time, some of the best players to ever play in the National Football League played at HBCUs. Every Monday through Friday on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, national radio and television host Donal Ware takes a look at what's happening in HBCU football and talks with coaches, players, administrators, and media about the 2022 season. Make sure you join the conversation on social media by using the hashtag HBCU130. Now, here's your host, Donal Ware.
You've got it locked to the HBCU Football Daily Podcast for today, Monday, August 29th. I'm Donal Ware. The HBCU football season has begun. We had 3 football games on Saturday to kick off the season. And, you know, we've got a plethora of games this weekend, some Thursday games, and the bulk of the games being played on Saturday as the full schedule kicks in. So let's look at the scoreboard. Generally, what we do is on Monday, we would kind of recap a couple of the games. We would recap the scoreboard, which, by the way, you can check out the scoreboard on our website at BOXTOROW.com, kind of run down the scoreboard and talk about some of the players that did well, some of the games. Tuesday would be Takeaway Tuesday, but we already have some guests scheduled as a matter of fact, on Tuesday for the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. So we're going to do it this way this week. But in the future, be looking for Monday recap of the scoreboard, talking about some of the games. Tuesday is Takeaway Tuesday. Okay, so just be on the lookout for that. In the Big Cat Classic between Florida Memorial and Edward Waters, Florida Memorial hung on to defeat Edward Waters 39-34 in that football game. In the game in Atlanta, Alabama State defeated Howard 23-13. Welcome, Mr. Davis, the quarterback for Alabama State, to HBCU football, to the SWAC. This young man, now, if you heard me on the HBCU Football Daily Podcast on Friday, I talked about the fact that, yes, he initially signed to Auburn, never played a game. He was highly recruited quarterback out of Texas, maybe one of the more prolific quarterbacks who ever play when you talk about the numbers in the great state of Texas when you're talking about playing football. So that to me was of concern that he had never played a college football game. Well, you know, I mean, we can talk about the game. I thought Howard had some opportunities in the game. Howard's really got to address that offense. The defense wasn't bad for Howard, but Davis came to play, had a really good football game as again Alabama State defeated Howard. Then our last game, we got to talk a lot about this game. We'll talk about the game, but we got to talk about the lead up to this football game. Florida A&M falling to North Carolina, or falling to UNC 56-24 in this football game. Let's talk about the lead up, because Florida A&M was missing in excess of 20 players for this football game. Let me give you a little bit of perspective in terms of what happened, and then I'm going to give you my opinion about a number of different things as it relates to this situation with Florida A&M. So Friday, it was announced that Florida A&M would not have, I think it was 21 players, maybe 21 players would be ineligible for this football game, not because of bad grades or anything like that. It's a myriad of things that happen, and we can talk more about. I'll get into more specifics. The team had a vote, initially wasn't going to play this football game. There's a lot of speculation out there that Florida A&M wasn't going to play that game. I think that speculation in the beginning was true, because the vote came back to say that Florida A&M would not, the Rattlers would not play this football game for safety reasons. I think most notably because it's one thing to have 20 players missing. I mean, if you have a lot of players and you may be forced to play some players, like you may be forced to play some true freshmen. And I think one of the things that the NCAA has done, which is a good thing, and we're going to talk about the NCAA in this segment as well, but I think one of the things that the NCAA has done is you have up to 4 games that you can play during the course of the season. If you play just in 4 football games, and you can take a redshirt year. So it wasn't the numbers. It was the fact that Florida A&M only had 8 offensive linemen. You got to have a lot of offensive linemen. That means you can't do anything offensively. We a lot of times we talk about the skill positions, right? Particularly offensively. And we don't talk about the offensive line, which is the most important unit on the football field. If you don't have an offensive line, a solid one, you can't run, can't protect the quarterback, etc. So only 8 offensive linemen. By the way, 2 of those offensive linemen get hurt in this game. Remember, Florida A&M is also playing up. So you're playing against a program that has, 84 scholarships. You have 56. That's a tough deal. So that's a little bit of the background with respect to the game almost not being played. And then ultimately Florida A&M, the Rattlers, decided to play in the football game, made the trek up to, matter of fact, Chapel Hill. We're located in Raleigh, about an hour away or so. So a couple of different things here. Number one, I worked in athletic administration for about 6 years. And I thought that this was only something that happened at the D2 level. In other words, in working at a university, sometimes if you'd come up on a football season and guys wouldn't be cleared, they would be ineligible, not necessarily because of grades, but because of a myriad of different things. But guys would just be ineligible, and you'd have to get them certified and all of that. They'd miss a game, they'd miss 2 games, they'd miss 3 games. I'd never heard of anything that I can recall. I'm sure it's happened, but I can recall, especially with the magnitude of this game, right? Like, this was a game where Florida A&M was representing HBCU football. UNC, for whatever reason, deemed this as the a celebration of HBCUs, which is great. That's fine. So Florida A&M is in essence representing HBCUs. Well, that's not very good representation, right? When you as Florida A&M, it comes out and it's true that you have in excess of 20 players that will be ineligible. So I thought that was a bad look right there. Number one, that you almost didn't play this football game, and I thought Florida A&M gave a valiant effort. We'll talk definitely more about that. How do you get to this point? How do we get to having players that are ineligible? Well, you had a situation where your athletics director resigned actually abruptly, not that long ago. He took a position at Tulane. And so you generally have a compliance officer, which allows for players or gets players certified. And at the smaller schools, a lot of times you only have one compliance officer. So it's a low, Florida A&M, like most of our HBCUs, are low resourced institutions. Again, I've always said, if you're going to play at the Division I level, but again, I don't want to. I'm not letting Florida A&M off the hook here, because there's a lot of programs that are low resourced institutions that have not had these kinds of problems. So number one, it was a bad look, I think, all the way around for Florida A&M in HBCU football. But how do you get to this point? I've heard where, Florida A&M wants to, do various upgrades to the stadium and all of those kind of things. I think if you're going to play on the Division I level, you've got to have the mechanisms in place to be able to not allow for things like this to happen. Now, I get it. Some transition in terms of, administrators not being there kind of led to this. A lot of times the blame will fall 2 places. 1, on the coach or the coaches. 2, on the student athletes themselves, because you say, well, you're ineligible. What you didn't pass the class. That wasn't the case in this scenario. I don't put something like this, from what I know about this situation, on Willie Simmons or any of his staff, because this is an administrative thing. Like, if you're a football coach, right? He probably preaches to his players every day outside of football. We got the football part, right? But then he probably talks to his players about being a man, right? Becoming a man, going through the process of getting older and being responsible. I'm sure he talks with them about the academic side, making sure you're attending your classes. I'm sure that there's a coach on that Florida A&M staff that may even check in with various teachers to make sure that those players are attending those classes. So I think from there, I would absolve the coaching staff from this. You're trying to prepare, if you're coaching staff, you're trying to prepare for a season. Things like that, and I've worked in athletic administration, things like that are handled by academic folks, compliance folks, etc. So what the issue was, again, it wasn't a class deal. It was a situation where players, if not all, some, were advised to take certain classes, okay, so they could be eligible and all of those kind of things, but they weren't necessarily advised correctly. Therefore, in the 11th hour, they are notified that they cannot step on the field, because if they step on the field, then they're ineligible. And then you have a bigger problem. So you want to kind of nip that in the bud. I give FAMU at least credit for that, for not putting any players that should not have been on the field, or even if there was a question mark. There may have been some players where you didn't know if they were ineligible or not. You don't put those players on the field. They did not. And you even had some players that were certified game of. That's bad. And the problem is, to me, when we look at the NCAA, and the NCAA in this situation penalized the student athlete as opposed to penalizing the institution. Yes, Florida A&M as an institution is the one who should have suffered the consequences behind this situation. Okay, it's not the student athlete's fault. If they're being advised to take certain classes, okay, to make sure that they're eligible, that they're certified, that they can play, and that's not just football, that's every sport, then those student athletes, in this case, football players, are going to take the classes that the university recommends. The university is and should be in constant communication with the NCAA in terms of the mandates that the NCAA has so that players are eligible. Okay. I don't know if, and again, some of that I think is a transitional situation. AD's out, you're trying to kind of fix, you're trying to put a Band-Aid on a situation that is very, very, is just a problem, right? Because you don't have, and again, we're talking about this transition in administration over the last couple of months. I mean, that's not a lot of time to make sure certain players are certified. Certainly there were players that they knew needed to do certain things to be certified, like take summer courses. For instance, certain players needed to take summer courses. Some of those players, from my understanding, did take those courses, but they weren't necessarily the right courses that those players needed to take. So that's how we come to this issue. Again, if you're the NCAA, okay, you got a low resource institution. Again, I believe that if you're going to play at the Division I level, that you should have the resources to play at that level. But I mean, sometimes it takes time to get to it. We know that Florida A&M has been sanctioned it has been sanctioned more recently by the NCAA for some of these very things that we're talking about, low resource institution, et cetera. We've seen programs. We saw, I'll give you an example. Remember when Rick Comegee was in Jackson State, and this was back in the mid part of the 2000s, Jackson State was having some real problems with, and I even said then this doesn't squarely fall on Rick Comegee, although he was in a lot of respects was the scapegoat. This falls on Jackson State. But you know what Jackson State did? Jackson State put an investment in terms of the academic side of the student athletes. They put money into that. There are grants and things that are out there from the NCAA. They put money into that. And ultimately, Jackson State became one of those rags to riches kind of institutions, if you will, admonished by the NCAA for so many violations, APR related, and ended up getting all of that squared away to becoming one of the ones that, okay, this is an institution that didn't do things well or didn't do things right, that is doing things right the right way. Okay, so with respect to Florida A&M, I think if you're Florida A&M, you've got to really address this. Do you need 2 compliance officers? Something like this can't happen. To me, it brings up a couple of different things. It reminds me when Florida A&M was getting ready to try to make the move to 1A. Remember back in, was that 2003, 2004? Ironically, what's ironic, I think about this, is Willie Simmons is the head of the program now. Well, when Florida A&M was going to make that move, Willie Simmons was going to make his move from Clemson to Florida A&M. As a matter of fact, it enrolled in Florida A&M, and then it all fell apart because of NCAA violations that, of course, I think not to absolve Florida A&M at that time from those violations, because those violations, it was a lot of speculation against the football program at that time, but nothing was found about the football program. It was a lot of the other sports that had so many violations that as quickly as Florida A&M made the move to 1A, it was right back in at that time 1AA or FCS. So that kind of comes to mind as well. Another thing that comes to mind is, wow, this isn't about the money. Okay, no doubt about it. The guarantee for Florida A&M in this game at USC with UNC was $450,000. But could you really afford to lose $450,000 by not deciding to play? Boy, that would have hurt, because we talk about low resource school. A lot of times you play these games to finance those budgets of the institutions. Maybe this $450,000 could help towards, and a compliance director, an assistant compliance director, academic people, whatever the case may be. You can use the money towards that. So I thought that would have been detrimental, certainly, if Florida A&M didn't play that football game. One player I want to point to in particular that this is a detriment to, and it speaks to, again, not being his fault as a student athlete, but to me, I fault the university, and then also the NCAA for penalizing the student athlete when it wasn't the student athlete's fault. Isaiah Land. Now, everybody knows Isaiah Land. Isaiah Land was the HBCU National Player of the Year last year. He was the Buck Buchanan Award winner. This guy is on the radar to be drafted. Now, he's a guy that probably had and we talked with him in January when he won the Buck Buchanan Award. This is a guy that may have had an opportunity to leave and go to another school. He decided, and he said, he stuck it out with Florida A&M. He believed in the program, right? So he believes in the program. He believes when advisors tell him that you need to take A, B, and C classes, he'll do that. And it ultimately was not the right thing for him. So what does he lose out on? Okay. Now, we've seen in the past where HBCU players have made their names against bigger opponents. Darius Leonard, when he was at South Carolina State as a junior, had 18 tackles against Clemson. He was on the map. He goes on to be a second-round pick by the Colts. He's one of the best defensive players in the National Football League. Look at Jacoby Durant more recently, also out of South Carolina State. 2 interceptions last year against Clemson. Jacoby Durant gets drafted. He's doing some big things right now in the National Football League. So, you as a player of that magnitude, this is where you, quote unquote, make your money. You have a good game against UNC because you're stepping up. It's an FBS opponent. Not only that, it's a Power 5 opponent. You play well. Now your name, which was already on everybody's list, takes another step up. So this young man now not only missed this football game, he could miss up to 4 football games. Not even talking about the game next week against Jackson State, which is another great measuring stick for him, because you're playing against an opponent in Jackson State, and I we'll see. I'm going to do, of course, a preview of that game. That's going to be the national game, HBCU game of the week. We'll do a preview of that. I think Florida A&M, previous to having all of these different injuries, great shot in winning that football game, no doubt. And if you're Isaiah Land, since everybody thinks Jackson State is the greatest team, right? You have a good football game against them. He may miss. He may not. But I mean, it looks like he could miss that football game as we stand on Monday. He could miss up to 4 football games. How much of a detriment is that to that young man who's looking to play on the next level? And he's just one player. You got some other players that probably will be certified by the time the game kicks off on Saturday. But I'm talking in specific about a guy that everybody knows who may not even be able to play in the football game. Of course, Willie Simmons and his staff's going to have to get creative depending upon how many offensive linemen they are able to get eligible. The NCAA, I think, has to really think about how it administers punishments. The NCAA essentially threw its hands up over the NIL. Essentially threw its hands up over name, image, and likeness. I can't really blame them. NIL is out of control. We can debate that. The transfer portal, out of control. NCAA threw its hands up over that. We're seeing how that is playing out. But the NCAA still is keeping its mandate and a lot of its mandates from an academic standpoint, in terms of the academics that you need to be eligible on whatever level it is, whether it's Division I, Division II, Division III, etc. Okay? It's keeping its hands on that. And I think that if a university tells a student athlete, tells a young man, tells a young woman that these are the classes that you need to take to be eligible for the fall semester, and those are in fact not the classes, or whatever the case was, that he actually needed, the NCAA should not be penalizing the student athletes. This is no doubt that FAMU bears the brunt of this. I'm not absolving Florida, and this is not NCAA's fault. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. This is Florida A&M's fault. What I'm saying is you cannot admonish, you cannot put the penalty on the student athlete when the student athlete is being the one that is being told by an advisor to, in fact, take certain courses. So, I know Willie Simmons had to be heated. Again, to me, this doesn't fall. I mean, the football coach has some responsibility in terms of, I think, in a lot of ways, making sure kids are going to classes. I think there's some responsibility there with respect to a football coach. But compliance issues, like that's not a football coach's job. So, the university, meaning Florida A&M, has to bear the brunt of this responsibility. And I think the NCAA, if there's punishment to be handed down, it should be handed down to the university, but not to the student athletes. You have in excess of 20 student athletes that missed their opening football game through really no fault of their own. And that's really sad, and it's very unfortunate. And I think it's something that the NCAA really needs to look at and not really punish those student athletes. That said, right? I said all of that. Look at the football game. I mentioned the score in the football game, 56-24. I thought it was I thought Florida A&M was respectable. Missing in excess of 20 players. You're missing your best player, one of the best players in college football, in Isaiah Land. And, I thought it definitely was respectable. I thought Jeremy Shute, the quarterback who came in, you knew if he was going to be the starter over McKay, which he was, must have been pretty solid. Look, he threw 2 touchdowns in this football game, threw for close to 300 yards. I mean, so that showed well. Again, you're going up against an FBS opponent. Yeah, I get it. It's an ACC opponent, which the ACC in terms of football is not great, but UNC, is solid. No question about that. I thought Florida A&M played a respectable football game, even in spite of all of this. But now we got to see what's going to happen throughout the course of this week. How many players are going to be eligible to play in that game against Jackson State? And that's going to be a big-time football game. And, of course, I'm going to have my thoughts on the HBCU football game of the week on Friday. So that's the HBCU Football Daily Podcast for today, Monday. We've got a couple of coaches interviews coming up for you on Tuesday and Wednesday, or tomorrow and Wednesday. On Thursday, we'll start to transition, take a look at some of the games for week 1 of the HBCU football season, which we have some games on Thursday. And then on Friday, of course, we will preview the HBCU national game of the week. Don't forget to tell a couple of friends about the HBCU Football Daily Podcast, where you're watching us right here. You can find us on the BOXTOROW YouTube page. Also, if you're listening, you can find us on our website at BOXTOROW.com, also on iHeartMedia.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. Talk with you tomorrow.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the HBCU Football Daily Podcast. You can also listen to the podcast at BOXTOROW.com, iHeartMedia, or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to get your HBCU football fix on BOXTOROW with Donal Ware each weekend on the radio station near you, and on SiriusXM on HBCU, Channel 142, and on ESPNU Radio on SiriusXM, Channel 84. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at BOXTOROW for the latest in HBCU football, and don't forget to tell a friend.